Welcome to another episode of BrainScratch. I'm your host, John Lorden. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. Last week, we talked about coronavirus and crime, and there was one particular topic we hit on that is kind of close to my heart. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and they said, you know what, I've got some information about that topic as well. So I want to dive into it much more today and see if we can do something in terms of getting good information out to help people. The headlines are saying it all. Domestic violence calls spike in Utah. Amid coronavirus quarantines and job losses, Colorado girds for wave of domestic violence. Domestic violence nonprofits prepare for increased abuse. Domestic violence on the rise because of coronavirus sheltering. For abused women, a pandemic lockdown holds dangers of its own. And that was from the New York Times. From that same article, early last week, as the coronavirus exploded from state to state, a woman called the National Domestic Violence Hotline in a crisis. Her partner had tried to strangle her, and she needed medical help, but feared going to the hospital because of the virus. Another woman was being forced to choose between work and home. He threatened to throw me out if I didn't work from home, she said. He said if I started coughing, he was throwing me out in the street and that I could die alone in a hospital room. The lives of people stuck in physically or emotionally abusive relationships have and will become harder, which has already been seen in the pandemic hotspots of China and Italy. Experts are saying that they've witnessed this pattern during the economic downturn of 2008, immediately after 9/11, Hurricane Sandy, and Hurricane Katrina. So today, I've pulled together some guests with the help of a good friend of mine, Sheila Wysocki, and we are going to have a conversation about this, hopefully get some good tips. These are people that have experience dealing on the front line, in many cases, with these types of high traumatic family drama that sometimes turns to violence. So I think there's a lot of good insights we can get here from the panel. Let me go ahead and bring them up. Of course, up in the upper right-hand corner, you will see Sheila Wysocki. In the lower left-hand corner, we have Mike Kenny, and then we have Sarah Kalin in the lower right. And I just want to take a moment for each of you to kind of introduce yourself, let the audience know who you are, what you do, how you fit into this conversation. Well, let's start with Sheila.
Hi, I'm Sheila Wysocki. I am a private investigator. I work on cold cases. And early in my career, I worked with rape victims and teaching kind of self-defense. That's what I basically did and do right now.
You also have a tendency to pick very difficult to solve cases. And there's a little bit of a trend in those cases, at least with the ones that I've worked with you on, where it does look like they're domestic violence related issues as well.
Yes. A lot of them are boyfriend, girlfriend type situations, and it doesn't end well. As we all know, whenever someone's leaving or is about to break up, that's the worst time for a volatile relationship.
Yeah. Right below me in the lower left-hand corner, we have Mike Kenny. How you doing, Mike?
Doing well, thank you. I'm a private investigator in Nashville as well. I do a lot of stalker cases, and we do cold cases. Sheila and I work a lot together on cold cases and locating people that don't want to be found, as well as some of the domestic violence. It's bleeding over right now without sports on television. We're seeing a lot of increases in domestic violence, as well as children that are calling 911. The police are overworked, but it's a tough time in our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of different factors that are coming into play. I didn't even think about that. You've got sports, a main entertainment venue for a lot of people that is just gone. And that, of course, is changing the focus in the house. People are kind of looking at different things around their house. Also, a very important consideration here is the children are at home. They're not at schools. So they don't have access to the teacher that they might tell if there's something going on at home, or the counselors at school that could help them. So yeah, a lot of unique challenges that we have going on here. In the lower right-hand corner with a beautiful cat is Sarah Kalin.
Yeah, I'm here with Velma today. So I was a police officer for 10 years and then went into research in the area of serial killers and serial sexual predators. And there's obviously a really strong overlap in the Venn diagram between serial predation and domestic violence. But even beyond that, I would say just in the years that I was on patrol, that I was, responding to 911 calls, I probably went on more domestic violence calls than all other dispatched calls combined. It is rampant. It is a actually growing problem right now. For the first time in 40 years, domestic violence has been on the rise for the last decade in this country. And so it's just something that I personally have been kind of on the warpath about for the last few years as I've moved into the area of cold case investigations, but also as a documentary film producer. I'm really kind of trying to put some more light on this and see if we can start getting some more attention on it in ways like this, honestly, where it becomes part of the everyday conversation again.
Yeah. And I really appreciate that because, I've been in this work now for about 5 years, and I've been covering cases like this over and over where, there's a high suspicion that there's a domestic violence issue, and I've donated to the causes and all that stuff. But it's really through great friendships that I have in this circle, including you, Sarah, and you, Sheila, that has pulled this together for me and really made me want to focus a bit more on highlighting these issues and just trying to get out some good information to try to combat some of this. Let me do a quick stop over at the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. We've got some statistics here. On average, nearly 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner in the United States. During 1 year, this equates to more than 10 million women and men. That's something I'm also noticing is the vernacular is changing a little bit. Domestic violence is kind of the easy term that gets thrown around a lot, but it also is more encompassing. Now I'm starting to hear intimate partner homicide as one specific category, or intimate partner abuse. Can you tell me, Sarah, a little bit more about the term domestic violence and how wide that is?
Sure. So the term domestic violence, I would imagine in every state, but in most states that I've ever looked at the codified language, the term domestic violence also encompasses relationships that not everybody would automatically think of, right? So my brother-in-law, if we got into a physical altercation, that is classified as domestic violence. Child abuse is also one of the several tiers is classified as domestic violence. So in most states, it covers any relationship by marriage or sanguinity, which means by blood. So domestic violence covers a lot, sort of a bigger swath of family violence, whereas intimate partner violence obviously speaks to specifically what it is. And the flip side of the need for a term like that is, as we are moving into a time when people, more and more people are cohabitating together without getting married. We see it in certain generations. We also see it, more cohabitation within the LGBT community that wouldn't previously have always been classified as domestic violence. And so intimate partner violence becomes, in a way, even though it seems like a subset, it becomes a more encompassing way to protect the victims. Once you add it into the language, the legal language, it allows for further protections, not fewer usually.
Yeah, I didn't even consider that for the LGBTQ community. That, years ago would have been a huge problem, because how do you even press charges?
Right. And a lot of states have moved or had moved in the last decade before marriage equality to cover anybody who was cohabitating, but not all states. And so as we expand the terminology and the legal language, we also expand the ability to protect more victims.
Yeah. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men have been victims of severe physical violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime. Sheila,
can I just say something real quick too, because this was the number that I didn't know until yesterday. By the latest statistic on the compilation of national crime data by the Department of Justice goes to 2018.
Right.
And in 2018, domestic violence accounted for more than half of all violent crime in the United States.
That is just mind-blowing. I can't believe that.
Agreed.
Certainly follows the trend that you guys are seeing as private investigators, right?
Definitely.
How much of the cases that you take on do you estimate would be in that arena, Mike?
Oh, at least half. I do a lot of celebrity stalker cases, and there's domestic violence even behind the velvet ropes, as we say. And part of the problem that we're dealing with now is social media in our stalker cases, that the best stalkers know which house you're in if you're a celebrity. And so if they, in a particular case yesterday, a female was up at her mountain house and the guy had already said he's on his way up there. Now she's petrified because there's no police coverage anyway right now. It's slowed down quite a bit with everything. And then when you take an entire department out, like what did Detroit had a large number of officers that were quarantined. Some of these areas are having a lot of quarantines of their police. So she was petrified up on the mountain because he knew from the pictures exactly what house she was in. Her social media told the whole story. And so we had to hire private security to drive up from Los Angeles yesterday to stand outside the house. And to date, he's not arrived at this point, but he will because he's that guy.
Wow.
But what do you do if you don't have private security? You
Right.
know, the person that is having either a stalker or, somebody who is violent towards them, and you don't have that ability to hire out.
So something that Sheila and I have talked about a lot is you have to provide false information out there a lot of times. So if you know that your stalker is going to come to your house, and go drive across town and do all your social media at another location, or do a virtual background, but convince them that you're not where they think you are, and at least put that distance behind you. And, I'm not a big believer in safe rooms, but I think it's always a good idea to be able to take your lights and turn them on and off. And even when you're home, to have a schedule where maybe you're hiding in a little area, but your Ring camera or whatever you have on just a very general domestic level, that you're able to see who's outside the house at all times.
Yeah. And the technology, it's so cheap and easy to implement now. I mean, who doesn't have a camera at their doorbell? And, they've got systems where you can get the whole house wired up and it's all integrated. All of it's going to the cloud. So it's not like the old days where someone would break in and they could find the recorder and they could take away the evidence. I mean, now it's literally on the internet within seconds. You also raised a very important point that I think
Mike and I are a little different on safe rooms. I believe in having a room with water and things like that. If you're a celebrity or, you're in a house with a bunch of people and things are going bad, have an area you can get to.
Yeah.
And lock.
That's an important element for everyone right now, is because you have to have, outside of general social distancing, as a family, you can sit down and play Monopoly as a family. And if dad's lost his job, dad's drinking because the liquor stores are open, this can end really bad if he's upset because you landed on his Park Place and didn't pay, right? I'm being a little silly, but it is that bad. And people are on such high edge right now that I think that calming things, anything you can do that's calming, and watch a happy movie, things that can take you away, are very important. That's another thing. The movie theaters are a big escape for children. You can take them to see this, to get them out of the house. That's all these elements are off the table right now. So with everyone home, and I love what iTunes has done, where you can rent some of the first run movies.
Yeah.
So I think you need to have some type of schedule, because children love structure anyway. But I think there needs to be happy elements, paint with them, color with them, go outside with them, other than being told to go inside if authorities are out there, play basketball, do things that are distractions, quite frankly, and happy. And dad, if the breadwinner, or mom's the breadwinner, whoever is the breadwinner that's under so much stress because they're worried that they're not going to get their stimulus check in time and they're going to be laid off and they're not going to get employed afterward. This should be a happy time. And I'd like people to try to embrace that. This is a quality time you're home with your family.
Yeah.
But drinking and those things that Sheila and I have conversations about frequently, they can escalate. So my advice to someone is, don't drink, and enjoy the quality time with your family, and do a lot of family activities that are happy and non-stressful.
Certainly a factor with everything that's going on, because I know I'm feeling it too. I actually get this reaction when I go out. I had to go out and try to find toilet paper like everyone else. And going to the stores and seeing the shelves all empty, like there was an anxiety in me, like instantly, and it got worse the longer I was in the store. And I know people are going through that and then coming home, and then it's like, oh, how do I cope? Man, I need a beer. Man, I need this. I need that. And of course, for some people, that could be a very bad direction to go in. We've also got a big factor in that people that are trying to work with their substance abuse issues might not have all the tools that they usually have in play now, because AA meetings are being canceled. Certain groups can't get together because they're too large. There's a lot of different factors. Sarah, do you have some information on alcohol? How frequent does alcohol become a factor in the issues that you saw as a police officer?
I mean, pretty frequently. I don't have hard numbers, and I guess I probably should look into the hard numbers on it. But I mean, I think whether alcohol is an underlying trigger factor for some explosive situations or not, which obviously it is in a lot of cases, the bigger thing that you hit on is the anxiety factor, because the domestic violence moves cyclically. So if we're not talking about somebody sort of unexpectedly experiencing the very first blow up that they've ever had from an intimate partner, if we're talking about somebody who is scared right now because this has been a pattern in their relationship, and now, oh my God, we're in these four walls 24/7 together, it's important to understand that cycle, no matter, is going to probably tighten, because we talk about precipitating factors as they move through the cycle. And then there's the explosion of violence, and then the cool down period and the apologies and everything like that. And then it begins to build again. And in a time when everybody with the best of coping skills and the worst of coping skills are dealing with intense levels of added anxiety and just fear and uncertainty, from finances to life and death, that cycle is going to tighten. And it, if people do have ways out, they should be keeping those avenues open, as best as possible, and just be a little bit more on the lookout for the things that, the red flags that lead sometimes to bad situations. And as much as we'd love for everybody to be able to enjoy their families right now, I mean, I definitely am. I hate to say that. It's not, I'm an introvert and I work from home already.
Right.
And so this hasn't been a huge shift for me. But for a lot of people, it's going to be a huge change. And if they're used to seeing those flags, man, keep an eye out, because they're probably, even with the best of intentions on the partner's part, whether they've had therapy and stuff like that, things may trigger a lot faster than they normally would.
Yeah. And especially without that escape of, I've got my job, I'm gone for 10 hours out of every day. That gives you a good cooling off period if you're, if things are hot at home. Yeah. And also there's another important aspect that, Mike, you touched on a little bit. You were talking about celebrities and the issues they're going through. Domestic violence is a problem that is just across the board, affects different classes, it's just all over the place. Sheila was talking to me. Sheila, do you want to tell us a little bit about the cases you've been looking into where sometimes the gated community almost seems to be working against the domestic violence?
So I lived in a gated community, and people tend to believe that if you have a certain house and you live behind gates, that there's no domestic violence. Within that gated community, there were 2 murders, actually 3 murders. And one was a doctor, and she was shot by her husband. And all the information started coming out about him. He was the odd neighbor. You would see him walking in the mornings. My friend and I would walk, and we'd run into him, and he had a ninja outfit on. And, you kind of think, oh, he's a little odd, but you don't want to judge too much. And then when he shot his wife, for whatever reason, people thought I was working the case. And so I started getting emails with clues. And I printed them off and took it to the police when they were going through the house. And he had a perch, like a getaway in the woods behind the community where he had food and water and things. And so we were able to get him there. But nobody thinks that somebody behind a gate would do things like that. You have a perception, and that perception's actually incorrect. It was that community, when we lived there, was the highest domestic violence in the city.
Yeah.
The other one, actually, Mike and I worked, we turned this person down. He ended up stabbing his wife. She was leaving him. She had her father and mother living with her, and she was leaving him, and he stabs her, and the father was there, her dad, and he got, I don't know if he was stabbed or shot, but the father got shot or stabbed. I can't remember. I can't believe that. And then the domestic violence person was killed, shot by the father. And so there you've got two bodies, and now kids without their mom.
Right. Yeah, that's a terrible aspect to all this. One other stat, domestic victimization is correlated with higher rate of depression and suicidal behavior as well. So there's just a lot that goes on with this. There's a lot that comes with these types of issues.
I think right now there's a lot of fear of the unknown out there. And Sheila and I had just had a conversation where I was talking to one of my neighbors, and they said, if I get this $1,200 check, that won't even cover my car payments. And I thought that was an interesting, I think people are expecting kind of a bailout, but it's depending on where you are, that might not be that much. And that is just propelling the fear that the conversation I had was the neighbor believed that things were going to go terribly bad. And I disagree. I think things are going to snap back pretty fast. But he said, if it doesn't, that doesn't cover my 2 car payments. And as I go forward, I don't know how I'm going to make my house payment. I don't know how my wife got laid off. I'm getting laid off. He's an IT guy, and he's very concerned that there'll be so much competition against him when the job market rises again. So I just think that anxiety out there is at a new level that we've never experienced. And the money, if you planned ahead, you're not worried, I think. But I think most Americans are very worried.
Yeah, definitely. Not everyone is used to working from home and, is working in the medical industry or these industries that are still necessary and ongoing. And it's been terrible. It's been terrible that, people that my favorite waiter, just all of a sudden he's out of work, and it's going to be for months. And it's a terrible situation. It's good to know. I think you're right, though, that once things bounce back, it's like, those businesses will hopefully still be there. Those jobs will still be needed, and things will kind of refill. It does feel like it's going to be a shuffle, because I know some organizations have been laying people off as opposed to just kind of pausing their business. I think they're doing that because some of them think it's actually helpful to their employees, because they can then claim for unemployment and stuff like that. But I'm with you, Mike. I'm hoping that there's more of a bounce back that we see in this.
Well, and John, the one thing is, the houses, I think, are pressure cookers. Mm-hmm. It's just getting, those walls are getting smaller and smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
And the first couple of days may have been all right, but now, we don't know how long it's going to be. It's 2 weeks in your area. We've been locked down. The things that are irritating you are now really irritating you. So I think tempers are going to be, flying off the handle and stuff. And if you're in that position and you're scared, communicate with family and friends. But then, Sarah, as you know, a lot of times they're isolated.
Yeah. One of the things that occurred to me yesterday, I saw something in a piece, and it kind of sent me on a little bit of a train of thought, because I was looking into whether or not the National Domestic Violence Hotline number, and I assume, John, you're going to put that up for everybody later, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So the website does have a chat feature, which allows you to be a little bit more discreet. But one of the things that I would recommend, if you're in a situation that you feel could escalate at some point, hotlines cannot call the police for you generally, but your friends and family can. And what I would recommend, it sounds a little bit spy movie-ish, but come up with a safe word for somebody that you trust that looks like, hey, if somebody looks over your shoulder and sees this text, it's completely innocuous, but it's a safe word for that person to call 911 or to find a way to, get to the house or something. I mean, you don't want to put civilians in the way, but if there's a way to cool things down or something. But I think establishing, before things get out of hand, establishing some sort of a safe word that would allow for a friend or family member to call 911 for you is maybe something to think about now, as we're kind of probably at the beginning, still sort of the early stages of what may be a long time, inside four walls together.
I think that's a great point. I covered a case, the Jessica Easterly death, and her family came on, and she had literally sent messages to her friends and family about things that she was going through, and they were very clear that she was being abused. And in that conversation, some important things came out. I had never heard before of people that are controlling people in those situations.
Oh, it's an enormous part of it. It's probably the biggest factor of the entire thing, is that they cannot often leave. They can't have communication. Sometimes, if you get up and go to the bathroom and take a phone with you,
right.
The abuser is concerned that you're reaching out to somebody.
Oh yeah.
So
he didn't want to let her have phone calls with anyone without him being in the room or even on the phone. There was also some talk, this was from a survivor actually. She was mentioning that her ex would make sure that the car never had too much gas in it, that she could never fill it more than a quarter of a tank.
I've seen that a number of times actually. On arrests where I ended up then having conversations with the victim afterwards. That's pretty common.
So if you're in one of those situations, it's almost important that, kind of like you mentioned, you have to act like a spy a little bit and maybe tuck away some change, get some type of gas card going, or reach out to that family or friend that you need to help make your escape when you're ready to do that. But there's another really important consideration here, and even the National Domestic Violence Hotline has this on their front page. It seems like a lot of women either don't know that they're in that situation, or they're not sure if they're in that situation, or maybe they're too embarrassed to admit that they're in that situation. There's this, I think there's a little bit of a gap between what might be going on and them being ready to act on it.
Yeah. Well, and there's also, that's not accidental. That's, that's a feature, not a bug, right? So what we see in the progression of domestic abuse tends to be first isolation. And so it's that, he's super romantic. I mean, I keep saying he, but we know that statistically that, it's the overwhelming numbers, but that the abuser is, very attentive, and all this stuff seems really exciting. And then as that begins to pull you away from other connections, then it gets tempered with this kind of ugly side of, nobody, look at how much I love you, obviously, and nobody would love you as much as I do. And so this sort of builds into a situation where a lot of times they believe what they're being told by the abusers, that nobody else would care for them as much. Look, you haven't heard from your sister in 6 months. Well, yeah, because, for a year you wouldn't let me talk to her, this kind of thing. And a lot of people, like you said, don't realize that they're in it at all, or until it's too late, essentially. And then it's harder, like you said, to either to admit through embarrassment or for fear. I mean, genuinely, people in volatile relationships love each other, you know what I mean? Like it's hard to make that decision to sort of pull the chute and say, I need to walk away from this, because you just keep thinking it's going to get better.
Well, and sometimes you need to see outside of a story that's been laid on you too. There's another trend I keep seeing is the abuser will typically have some type of story about what the fallout's going to be if you try to go against them. Oh, I've got all these army buddies. Hey, remember my friend's a sniper. I hang out with all these gang thug guys. They off people all the time. You think you're going to get away? Go for it. Give it a shot.
Well, and like Sheila pointed out at the beginning, but I think we can't reiterate this enough, is that just prior to or just after leaving an abuser is the most dangerous time. That is when a victim of domestic abuse is most likely to be murdered, or, an attempted murder. And so while a lot of times in the public, people are like, oh, why didn't she just leave? Sometimes they know better than anybody else that is going to be the riskiest move.
Yeah.
And that's why, therapists in those situations always talk about, creating a safe plan. Jennifer Doulos is this case that everybody was sort of paying attention to last summer. And Jennifer Doulos did everything right. She did have a safe plan. He did not know she was leaving. She had a house rented, an hour away. She sort of went about everything the best that you can do. And she honestly had all the resources that a lot of women don't have financially, and a supportive family and everything. And it still happened to her.
Right.
So I think, it is important to support people as best we can if they do make that step, but also to understand it's a lot more complicated than people on the outside think.
Yeah. And I think it's important for people in those situations to remember that your friends and family are there, and they're ready for that change in most cases. In most cases, they know exactly where you're at, and they're ready to see you get out of it. So finding those resources, once you start putting that plan together, might not be as difficult as you think it is, or the story that's being laid on you from the abuser might lead you to believe.
Well, and that actually brings up another point, something I made a note on, is that in this social distancing and in isolation, something, specific to the situation that we're in right now, is family members and friends and coworkers and stuff, a lot of times are the ones that will call a red flag out. And so now all of a sudden these people are not in front of those red flag callers anymore. You know what I mean? So
right.
It's just another layer of this particular problem in this particular time that, we need to kind of continue a dialogue to help people work through.
Yeah. We just got our stay in place orders. They actually go into effect later today from when this episode is dropping. And there was a specific clause, I actually read through the whole document, that is telling people, so I'm putting this out there so you guys know, at least for the state of Minnesota, and I'm pretty sure it's the same everywhere else, they are okay to leave the house if you're in a domestic violence situation, or even if you're just at risk. That is an acceptable reason for you to be able to leave the house. So please don't listen to some other story you're hearing within your home of, you can't go out right now and you're going to stay here and you're going to take what I'm going to give you.
And that's actually really good. I'm glad to hear Minnesota. I haven't heard that from any other state. One thing I have heard from other states, and so I tried to get, reach out on Twitter and have people maybe let me know if they heard from their particular state. But so far, Pennsylvania, New York, the District of Columbia, North Carolina, and California have all said across the board that any temporary protection order is automatically extended indefinitely, because the courts, they will take in new cases, right? So if you need to file for a TPO or a restraining order, whatever the language is in your state, you can still get to a courtroom to do that.
Yeah.
But because so many courts are going to be closed, all protection orders in those states, and I'm hoping more, are extended indefinitely until this crisis is over. So your protection order is probably still valid and hopefully, serving at least the purpose that it can serve.
That's great to hear. I know I've also been seeing articles about the counseling centers, where would you go to if you're in one of these situations? A lot of them are doing everything they can to remain functional, at least from what I'm seeing here in Minnesota. They're having to make some adjustments, like, beds are being moved further apart. Sometimes they're bringing in temporary buildings to try to help with this. Some of them might be shut down in certain areas. So it's one of those things where if you've got your plan and you have to kick it on now, you just want to be sure to double check whatever location you're heading to, make sure that they're still operating. I did do a look earlier today, and at least for local resources, it looks like about 2/3 of them are still open here, where they're still able to take people. So it's an important consideration if you are looking to get out of a situation like that right now. Of course, in-person support groups, a lot of those are getting suspended. I did also look at the substance abuse meetings for my local area, and it looks like the same thing. About 1/3 of those are closed. About 2/3 of them are still working in some way. So we've got a lot of different considerations because of where we're at right now. And we've also got the possibility that abusers could be blaming their family member for illness, or like those examples I read early on, I'll throw you out in the street and, leave you to the virus. I mean, almost using it as a threat as well. Mike and Sheila, did you have some input or some thoughts on what people can do in this particular time to help themselves in this situation?
I'll start. Or do you want to start, Mike?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I really am a firm believer, it is nice to change the subject and try to make things happy around the household. The stress on the person being abused is so overwhelming to keep the kids quiet, and keep themselves safe, and the children. So having a place separate from the abuser, again, we're talking you're in four walls in a house and nobody around you. So you have to do what you need to do. So have water in a closet, or, food, and do what you need to do to remove yourself from the situation. Doesn't mean it's going to work, but it's something to think about and have a plan. Yes, it's nice to keep in touch with family and friends, but most people are isolated. But at this point, you really need to figure out and have a plan. I say this a lot, and I hate to say it, but it doesn't always work. And, that's the reality of the situation. So if you can do what you think it through, try to have a plan. You have the added extra problem of children around. So you need to kind of figure out what you're going to do about the children as well. And, what other things were we talking about, Mike?
We talked about having a plan with a neighbor too at one point, that you might want to have, like, we joke about the Amish community and the fact that they're solely self-sufficient. And so somebody, if you're having an issue at your house, you may be good to go down the street to your neighbor's house and still keep the social distancing, but get out of the immediate threat.
That's a great point. Sarah, do you have any input on that?
No, I mean, I think they're great tips. And I think we are in a situation where a lot of people are going to be finding ways to diffuse situations. And sometimes that isn't always possible, but I certainly can't imagine that any of the four of us would be telling somebody who lives with this daily anything they don't already know about trying to keep that person when it feels like they're winding up. So, but I think, one thing I do want to say, and I feel like I've definitely talked entirely too much today. I'm sorry, guys. But I think, for all of your followers, John, and everybody, who's watching this, who's not in this situation, you can do something right now too. If you are working from home, or if you are, unfortunately laid off, but not in a crisis mode yourself, you can call your local government, you can call your state representatives, and bearing in mind that your state rep is probably the single most valuable asset you have. That is the politician in your life who most impacts your day-to-day life, and yet is usually available for appointments, or in this case, like phone calls and stuff, because it's sort of that middle tier level of representation, and find out if they are doing anything to help keep these shelters open. I mean, 2/3 is great, but we barely have enough as it is.
Right.
So 2/3 of not enough is less than not enough. And you can, start firing off those emails and those postcards to the U.S. Senate, because we've been waiting for the Violence Against Women Act to be re-upped now for almost a year. It's the first time since 1994, when it was enacted, that it has not been re-upped. And part of the reluctance to that is because it includes language specifically to protect LGBT communities, and because it has specific language about guns. And so there is this pushback, from certain political elements to say, well, we can't allow the language to go forward. But the flip side of that is that more police officers are killed on domestic violence calls than any other call.
Right.
And so it doesn't matter what side of the spectrum you're on politically, the Violence Against Women Act protects everybody involved. When it hits the fan, that piece of paper has provided, legislation and funding and support at the state and municipal level to protect everybody in the room. So if you are at home and feeling like you're climbing the walls because you're a helper and you're not able to go out into society and help right now, this is something you can do.
That's a really good thing. Yeah. And a good way to kind of take some of that extra time and focus and do something that's going to help your community. Also being there, if you have a friend or a family member, and just being open. I know sometimes it's tough because if you have someone in that situation, you hear the same stories over and over, and sometimes you can start feeling jaded yourself, or like even wanting to distance yourself from them because it's like, I'm tired of them not doing anything about this. This is really the time to remain open, to just wait for that, just keep that sliver of hope and wait for that chance that they're ready to make the change. And when they are, bounce in there, jump to action, give them all the support that you can. There's a very good chance with the numbers that we're talking about that someone that you know is going through this. So,
well, I do want to ask Sarah a question about that, John. I'm sorry, Sarah. Finish what you were going to say. I have a question, though.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, with those numbers, there's no chance that you don't know somebody.
Yeah.
Well, I have a question because I'm a speak up person. If you see something, speak up. You could stop something. But in domestic violence situations, I have a little anxiety saying that because the person is volatile and they may turn on the person speaking up. So if you see something, do you say something?
That is a very complicated question, and you're 100% right. They may not only turn on the person who's saying something, they may then take it out worse on the person at home. Obviously, if you witness a physical act of violence, call the police. That is what they're there for. That is their job. You want to be as clear and concise as possible on 911. This is a physical act of violence. I just witnessed, or I am witnessing somebody be assaulted. Like, you want to use frank language. But if it's something where you felt like there was some verbal abuse that made you a little prickly and you kind of thought, is this indicative of something? Is this a flag? Those are the flags we're talking about, that, reaching out to that person, the victim, the person on the receiving end, might be the better part of valor. You know what I mean? So, because they know better than you do what provokes the abuser.
Yeah, that's a really good point. There's also a different consideration from that article at the New York Times. Casa De Esperanza in St. Paul, Minnesota. Teresa Burns' many clients are undocumented individuals whose immigration status can become a means of control by abusive partners. It's not uncommon for abusers to claim that survivors will be deported if they seek help. She fears that these type of threats will escalate in what we're facing right now as well. Almost along the same lines as that gated community thing. I mean, there's certainly a big aspect of the abuser controlling the environment and the interactions of the person. And in those situations where you're an undocumented individual, things can be really closed in. And yeah, those four walls can be really, really tight. So a lot of different considerations. I'm actually, because that is local to me, I'm going to be making a donation to them in honor of today's episode and everyone's struggle with this. Also, the hotline.org is there. Their number is 1-800-799-7233. That also spells the word SAFE, 1-800-799-SAFE. And like was mentioned on today's episode, you can chat there if you go to the hotline.org, or you can call if you can make phone calls. They've got a bunch of different resources, a bunch of ways to help you. They've been operating for over 20 years. In 2016, they actually had their 4 millionth contact. They are receiving way too many calls. They envision a world where all relationships are positive, healthy, and free from violence. Their mission statement is to answer the call to support and shift power back to those affected by relationship abuse. You can also follow them on Twitter at NDVH. And once again, in honor of today's episode, we're going to be making a donation to the hotline.org. There's someone that I like to support. We do it several times a year, but thought no better time than right now, especially with all the work that they're probably taking on and will continue to take on with everything that we're facing. Anything you guys want to say before we sign off?
Yeah, can I throw something else?
Yep, of course. Go.
Sorry, if you're struggling with abuse, there's no better time to go to rehab than right now. While you have insurance, why you're able to go. They're cleaning. Most of the rehabs we've talked to are very clean, like the hospitals. They're following the CDC guidelines. So I think you can remove yourself from an equation if you know you're the problem and go away right now and get the help you need.
What a great angle on that. Yeah, really appreciate that, Mike. Sheila?
One other thing, Mike touched on this earlier. The abuse is not just males against females. My cases, I am seeing an escalation on females abusing or murdering males. So the last year, I've spent more cases on females shooting males than ever before.
Yeah, really good point. And finally, Sarah?
I would just say that if, like we said, if you're not in this situation, you can certainly find a way to release some pent up energy by a little bit of activism. And if you are in this situation, as hard as it is, try and find a lifeline to somebody on the outside, somebody that you trust, like I said, either for, a safe word or even just to be able to talk to, that lifeline is going to be really critical the longer we're all separated from each other. I mean, for both the support from the situation, but also just emotionally.
Yeah, it might take a team. If it takes a team, put your team together. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to say on a personal note, I'm so privileged and honored to be able to pull together a group like this. And I thank you all for your friendship and your professional courtesy for coming here today. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you, John, for doing this.
You got it. I'll be right back with you just as soon as I sign off. That is it for today's episode, everyone. I think I'm going to put this episode on a special page on BrainScratchers.com. I just want to make sure that it's available. A lot of the stuff that we talked about today, yeah, we're talking about the times we're going through right now, but a lot of those tips are going to carry forward past this time as well. So I want to make sure that anyone that needs this video can get to it. And if you are in this situation, please, even if you just think you might be in this situation, look into it, look into these resources. I'm going to have a bunch of links in the description box down below, and put that team together, find that help, make that plan, and change your life. Take care, everyone. I'll see you back here on Monday with a brand new episode of Case Cracked on the Lord and Arts channel.